Hi, I'm Seamless, and I'm synthesizing more stuff. And today is about a kick, and this is what I got. I actually kind of went a little against the grain here, and I was trying to recreate a very acoustic sounding kick drum. And what I did is I opened up Superior Drummer and went to the Metal Foundry sample set, and I loaded up the first kick drum, and I decided that I would try to recreate it using Citrus. And that's kind of what I did. There's no effects anywhere. It's all inside Citrus itself. Much like the snare, this is all built up of various parts that are kind of equaling and adding up to the whole business. But let's talk about kind of how this worked out. You might be wondering, why am I going to something that's honestly fairly complex in the first in the series of how to kick, which I'm going to call it that. That's what's going to be called. And that's because I feel like a lot of people kind of already know how kick drums are synthesized. But, and honestly, I mean, you know, the basic theory behind it, I apply here anyway. So we're still going to get that basic concept of how this works. So in the beginning, much like the snare, if you saw how to snare, which I have also started, it began with a pitch fall, which is this guy right here. It's exactly the same thing as what we did with the snare, only it's lower. I have the pitch over here, set up the pitch envelope all the way up so that we got 4 octaves, although I didn't end up using most of it. I am using the ratio though, instead of a fixed pitch value. But you should see kind of clearly how well that works, what I think, you know, the purpose of how that works. Now, when I made this kick, I'm tuning it essentially to be the correct sample and everything at C5, which is sort of, you know, it's the center, it's the middle C. That's where I'm playing it so that it works. Every other note you can play, and it'll play a different note, but it won't be, you know, the original sort of sample position. It's not really a sample. I'm calling it a sample because it sounds like one, but it's not a sample. So that's this guy. Now, the second part that I did was this floofy thing going on here. Now, this was the result of just studying the Superior Drummer sample. What I did, I mean, I had this EQ open that I'm using to actually show you what the spectrum's doing, and that's what I did. I played the Superior Drummer sample, and I just looked at what the spectrum was doing for it, and I kind of created sounds in Citrus that represented that activity. And this represented something that I saw going on and kind of in this little mid-low area. And I accomplished this by using operator 2. It's a sine wave. I pitched it down to kind of be at the position it needed to be. And then I am modulating it relatively slowly. As you see, the ratio here is 0.05. That's particularly low. But in the oscillator tab, you can see I actually have got a couple oscillators and the phase is all weird. And if I didn't have a volume mod, that's what it would sound like. But then with the volume mod, it just floofs. And with the reverb engaged, this actually serves to, which you can't really tell by itself, but it serves to give a really kind of interesting airy room impression on everything together. So without it, the actual pitch fall sine wave that is the first oscillator here kind of sounds way more synthetic and fake than it would with the other guy kind of engaged, even though it is a very subtle difference. The next part is this guy. Now, this is sort of the primary character of the kick. Like where I decided to put the first output, you know, where it goes down here, was very much just a product of looking at, you know, how far it went down for the kick drum that I was emulating, and then I just put it down in a place that made sense. Now, metal kick drums. This is called a metal kick because it's a kick drum that's designed to work in the metal genre. They have a lot of high frequency content, but not as much high frequency content as, say, regular electronic snares or kick drums. Like dubstep-based kick drum samples that are finished and processed and all good have an unimaginably high amount of high-frequency content. Metal kick drums do too, but not nearly as much. And in fact, it centers more on the high mids, like the 2K, 5K area, than it does like anything higher than that. And that gets us this sort of ringy area that we actually focus. If you listen to any really well-made, like well-produced sort of metal, you'll hear that 2K, 5K area and the kick really clearly because it punches through extremely well. And middle kicks tend to be played so fast that they're being distinctive and thumpy low end is actually pretty detrimental to the mix overall. But definitive and punchy high end is easy enough to mix against everything else. So that works out pretty good. And then there's this very, very light amount of noise that I added in here. Also, I made, I probably about how I made this. Is again a sine wave, and it has an extremely short and volume envelope. Because that's what it sounds like without it. Also, a little bit of pitch mod going on. I don't have it up to the 4 octave setting. It's at the 12. It's a regular default setting. It's also relatively high frequency. It's also being, the reason why this is working out the way it is because it's being modulated by operator 5 here, which is a very high frequency, well, mid-high frequency mess. I think there's some higher, no, that's just it. You get, the reason why the phases are different, the bottom half here is phase, the top half is amplitude, because I went down here and said randomized phases to make the phases random. Because if the phases weren't random, they're all together, then sort of it wouldn't be as much of an inharmonic mess as it is. Although the true inharmonic mess nature of it is a result of the fact that they're vastly different pitches, one being really, really high and one being rather low. And even though, I mean, this is the ratio is rather low, but notice there's no fundamental tone. In fact, the loudest tones are like a couple harmonics up. So this is actually relatively close to, in terms of center position, and relatively close to the actual other guy's pitch, but not close enough to be identical enough to create really a usable note outside of what we heard there. But the fast nature of the FM is a big reason why this envelope for the volume mod had to be super sharp like this. Because even if it wasn't, we get that kind of buzz. We don't want the buzz. We want the very small click. And the slight pitch mod is also active enough to give it like a decent impression of snap. Which, as if you remember, if you actually didn't watch the how to snare, I kind of recommend you do that because I go over a lot of this, and it just sort of apply these same concepts, but just in a different way to create snares, a very specific kind of snare. Yeah, so that's that guy. And now noise. This is just a noise oscillator going into filter, and I believe I'm altering the resonance. Yeah, so here's the volume of the filter, so it comes on, it kind of lingers. And then I'm not messing with the cutoff, but I am messing with the resonance so that this is a straight up bandpass. I'm not using the SVF for the variable filter. I'm using just the regular bandpass filter. And resonance, if you remember, controls the bandwidth of a bandpass. So low res, high res, low bandwidth, high bandwidth. That's what a bandpass's Q value does, or resonance value. That's what this is controlling. It's really subtle and kind of hard to see specifically just because of the volume automation. Okay, that's more. Yeah. Now the whole point of this is that it merges with this guy to kind of give it more softer kind of thump. I noticed that when I was looking at the finished kick sample and the superior drummer sample, that the higher frequency activity didn't really move very much. In fact, the only real movement in the entire thing is what the low end kick, this first oscillator. This is only really here for such a short period of time that it actually looks like static harmonic content. But there are still, noise values because any kind of realistic instrument will have a airy kind of quality to it. Superior drummer works by having mic positions, and I didn't actually have any of the, I soloed the kick mic itself. So I'm basing this on the direct input from a microphone that's inside a kick drum. So you're going to get, not necessarily a roominess, but if you qualify the inside of a kick drum to be a room, then that's kind of what's up with that. Now in the effects side, I'm using a very warm reverb, very small decay time, and actually kind of a lot of dampening. And this serves to kind of give it a more controlled kind of roomy feel. And here's what I was talking about earlier about really getting that roomy feel, but by having a lot of reverb on the second aspect here. And so with the application of reverb and sort of mixing all of the individual elements, you have an incredible amount of control over how you can get this kind of sound to sound, which is the benefit of doing this, by the way. If you're wondering why bother synthesizing a kick drum like this, especially if, I was comparing it to having Superior Drummer. So why do I just use Superior Drummer? Well, as much control as Superior Drummer gives you over sample usage, and they give you kind of a lot, nothing beats having total control of the sound from, the ground up. It's just that usually you don't have an ability to make something so realistic sounding. Although, if you think about sort of how metal works and how the electronic genres work, is that as much as we like to layer in realistic sounding things, we kind of also like the synthetic sounds because they are easier to work with. And one of the reasons is because we have ultimate control over how it works. We can tune it directly, we can change the quality, we can change the character, and we can do it all individually. Like if I really wanted to, I could have 4 Citrus instances that represented each individual one of these outputs oscillators, put them in a patcher, and then EQ them all separately and filter them all separately, and build the perfect sort of kick emulator, and kind of just go off and do that. You can do the same thing with the same deal with the snares, and it just means that you have a hugely more control over sort of how the sound works than you would otherwise. Outside of that, this is honestly just a cool sort of intellectual experience and learning, how to synthesize whatever the hell you want. And that's kind of what I've been doing. And it's been a lot of fun, learning how to synthesize percussive elements, because I've never done that before. Rather, I've tried, but it's been a disaster. It's been much less disastrous this time around, and I hope you agree. So yeah, this preset I'll put in the description so you can download and take a look at it. If you have any questions about any of this, let me know. And as usual, have a nice day.